Sergeant Iris Blackwood's hands never trembled when she cleaned the rifles. Not once in 3 years had anyone noticed how her fingers moved with surgical precision across the bolt assembly, or how her eyes instinctively calculated wind patterns through the range's open windows. They saw only what she wanted them to see: a quiet clerk who kept perfect ammo logs and never complained about overtime. But when Colonel Reynolds accidentally glimpsed the classified stamp on her military ID that afternoon, everything changed. 134 confirmed eliminations, the same number attributed to a ghost operative known only as Shadowhawk, someone who supposedly didn't exist. The morning started like every other Wednesday at Camp Riverside's shooting range in Nevada. Iris arrived at 0630 hours, 30 minutes before anyone else, carrying her thermos of black coffee and wearing the same faded utility uniform that made her blend into the concrete walls. She unlocked the ammunition storage room with practiced efficiency, her movements economical and precise, though she appeared to move with the careful deliberation of someone who had never held anything more dangerous than a clipboard. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she began her daily inventory, checking serial numbers against her meticulously maintained logbook. Each entry was written in the same neat handwriting that had fooled everyone for 3 years. To anyone watching, Iris Blackwood was exactly what her personnel file claimed: a former desk clerk from Supply Logistics who had requested a transfer to range operations after a messy divorce. The story was perfect because it was partially true. There had been a divorce, though the mess had been blood rather than paperwork, and it happened in a compound in Afghanistan rather than a courthouse in Nevada. Staff Sergeant Williams arrived at 7:15, stomping his boots and complaining about the cold December air that seeped through every crack in the old building. He was a good soldier, competent enough at his job, but he possessed a kind of casual arrogance that came from never having faced real danger. "Morning, Blackwood," Williams grunted, hanging his jacket on a peg near the door. "Got the target set up for brass today?" Iris nodded without looking up from her logbook. Ranges 1 through 4 are configured for standard qualification. Range 5 has the long-distance setup. She kept her voice level unremarkable, the tone of someone discussing grocery lists rather than precision shooting lanes that stretched out to 800 meters. William scratched his belly and peered at the clipboard in her hands. "You ever actually fire any of these beauties, Blackwood? I mean, besides that basic training stuff?" The question was innocent enough, asked with the kind of patronizing curiosity reserved for civilian contractors and support personnel. Iris allowed a small, self-deprecating smile to cross her face, the expression she perfected over months of similar interactions. "I'm better with paperwork than firearms, Sergeant. That's why they keep me back here with the inventory." It was a lie wrapped in truth. She was exceptional with paperwork, maintaining records that impressed even the most detail-oriented officers. But her real talent lay in the mathematical precision required to place a bullet exactly where it needed to go from distances that made other snipers nervous. The morning progressed with its usual rhythm. Junior enlisted soldiers arrived for their weekly qualification rounds, most treating the exercise as a minor inconvenience between more interesting duties. Iris handed out ammunition with mechanical efficiency, noting consumption rates and weapon conditions with a thoroughness that had made her invaluable to the range operations staff. Around 10:30, a group of officers arrived for their monthly proficiency testing. Iris recognized most of them, mid-level captains and majors who maintained their marksmanship credentials more from regulation than passion. They chatted among themselves about upcoming assignments and weekend plans, while Iris prepared their equipment, invisible in a way that support personnel always were career officers focused on their next promotion. Colonel Nathan Reynolds was different. Iris had noticed him during his previous visits, not because he demanded attention like some senior officers, but because of how he carried himself. There was an economy to his movements that spoke of real experience, and his eyes held a particular alertness that came from time spent in places where mistakes carried permanent consequences. He was probably in his late 40s, with silver beginning to show at his temples, and when he spoke to the enlisted soldiers, it was with the respectful directness of someone who understood that competence mattered more than rank in actual combat situations. The colonel approached Iris' station with his rifle, a standard M4 carbine that showed signs of careful maintenance. "Ammunition for a qualification course, please," he said simply. His voice carried a slight Texas accent, barely noticeable except in the way he elongated certain vowels. Iris handed him the required magazines, her fingers brushing as briefly as he accepted them. For just a moment, their eyes met, and she saw something flicker in his expression, a brief recognition that went beyond their formal interaction. Then the moment passed, and he moved toward the firing line with the other officers. From her position behind the safety barrier, Iris watched the qualification proceed. Most of the officers performed adequately, hitting center mass at the prescribed distances with a mechanical precision that came from years of routine practice. But Colonel Reynolds was different. His shooting demonstrated the fluid competence of someone who had relied on accuracy when lives depended on it. He didn't just hit the targets. He placed each shot with deliberate precision, achieving tight groupings that spoke of muscle memory developed under pressure. During a brief break in the firing sequence, the colonel set his rifle on the bench and walked back toward the ammunition station. Iris was entering the latest consumption data in her logbook when he stopped beside her table. She looked up to find him studying her face with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You maintain excellent records," he said, glancing at her logbook. "Very thorough documentation." "Thank you, sir. I find that attention to detail prevents problems later." Iris kept her response professional, but she noticed how his gaze seemed to linger on her hands as she wrote. She had worked hard to soften the calluses that came from years of gripping rifle stocks, but traces remained for those who knew what to look for. The colonel nodded slowly. Attention to detail. That's crucial in this line of work. There was something weighted in his tone, as if his words carried meanings beyond their surface interpretation. "How long have you been working range operations, Sergeant Blackwood?" 3 years, sir. Since my transfer from supply logistics." The answer came easily, rehearsed, and believable. Iris had learned that the best covers contain enough truth to satisfy casual scrutiny, while obscuring the deeper realities that needed to remain hidden. "And before your military service?" The question was more pointed than idle conversation warranted. Iris felt a familiar tension begin to build in her shoulders. The subtle alertness that had kept her alive through 7 years of operations in places that officially didn't exist. "College, sir. Criminal justice degree from University of Nevada. Not very exciting, I'm afraid." Colonel Reynolds smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I find that the most interesting people often have the least exciting official biographies." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "What made you choose range operations after supply work?" Iris set down her pen and looked directly at him, allowing a hint of genuine emotion to show in her expression. "I needed something different after my divorce. The quieter pace here helps me focus on rebuilding." Truth wrapped around necessary deception. The rebuilding was real, though it involved learning to sleep without checking sight lines from her bedroom window rather than recovering from a failed marriage. The qualification session continued for another hour. Iris maintained her usual professional efficiency, but part of her attention remained focused on Colonel Reynolds. She found herself analyzing his shooting technique with the automatic assessment that came from years of evaluating other professionals. When the session concluded, the officers gathered their equipment and prepared to leave. Iris was processing the day's ammunition expenditure reports when she realized she had left her military identification badge on the bench near the firing line. She walked out to retrieve it, moving quickly to avoid disrupting the cleanup routine. The badge lay beside a stack of target sheets, its edge partially concealed beneath some scattered brass casings. As she reached for it, she heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Colonel Reynolds approaching with his equipment bag. "Forget something?" he asked, his tone casual, but his eyes were fixed on the identification badge in her hand. Iris held up the badge. "Can't leave the base without it." She started to slip it into her pocket, but the colonel's voice stopped her. "Mind if I take a look?" The request was phrased politely, but something in his tone made it clear that refusal wasn't really an option. Iris hesitated for just a moment, then handed him the badge. Colonel Reynolds held the badge up to the light, examining it with the thoroughness of someone accustomed to scrutinizing documents for authenticity. Iris watched his face as his eyes moved across the standard information: her name, photograph, security clearance level, assignment details. Then his expression changed. His eyes widened slightly, and she saw the color drain from his cheeks as he focused on something specific: the classified stamp. Iris realized with growing alarm that her operational security badge, the one that contained her real service record, had somehow gotten mixed up with her cover identity documentation. The stamp that showed her actual clearance level, the one that included her deployment history, and most damning of all, her confirmed elimination count. 134th, the number that matched exactly with the classified record of an operative known only as Shadowhawk. Colonel Reynolds stared at the badge for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. When he finally looked up at Iris, his expression was completely different. Gone was the polite interest of a senior officer, making small talk with support personnel. In its place was the intense focus of someone who had just encountered a puzzle that could have significant implications. "Sergeant Blackwood," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, "I think we need to have a much longer conversation." Iris felt the familiar sensation of operational exposure, the moment when careful cover arrangements began to unravel and split-second decisions determined whether situations could be contained or would spiral into something much more dangerous. "I'm not sure what you mean, sir," she replied, maintaining the confused innocence that had served her well in similar situations. "Is there a problem with my identification?" The colonel studied her face with the intensity of someone trying to read signals in a foreign language. "The problem, Sergeant Blackwood, is that this badge indicates you have a very specific type of operational experience, the kind that doesn't typically lead to positions in range safety operations." Iris realized that denying the obvious would only make the situation worse. Colonel Reynolds clearly understood what he was looking at, and attempting to maintain her cover story would insult his intelligence while potentially escalating the confrontation. "Sir, I'd appreciate it if we could discuss this somewhere more private." The colonel nodded immediately. "My office. 20 minutes. He handed back her badge, but his eyes never left her face. "And Sergeant Blackwood, I think it would be best if we kept this conversation between ourselves until we better understand what we're dealing with." The walk to the administrative building gave Iris time to consider her options. She could attempt to maintain her cover story, claim that the badge was an error or administrative mix-up, but Colonel Reynolds struck her as too intelligent and experienced to accept such explanations. She could acknowledge her real background, but request that he respect her need for operational security. That approach carried risks, but it might also establish a foundation for the kind of mutual understanding that had kept her alive through 7 years of classified operations. Colonel Reynolds' office occupied a corner of the second floor, with windows that overlooked the main parade ground and the distant mountains beyond. Iris knocked precisely at the appointed time and was invited to enter. "Please sit down," he said, his manner professional but noticeably different from their earlier interactions. "Can I get you coffee?" Iris accepted the offer, partly because she needed the caffeine, but mostly because the ritual preparation would give both of them time to settle into what promised to be a complex conversation. "I have to admit," Colonel Reynolds said without turning around as he prepared the coffee, "in 24 years of military service, this is the first time I've accidentally discovered that my range safety clerk might be one of the most lethal individuals currently serving in the armed forces." The directness of his statement eliminated any remaining possibility of maintaining her cover story. Iris decided that honesty, carefully managed, offered the best chance of containing the situation. "Sir, I think there might be some confusion about my background and current assignment." Colonel Reynolds turned around, holding 2 cups of coffee. His expression was serious, but not hostile. "Sergeant Blackwood, or perhaps I should ask what name you prefer. The badge clearly indicates operational experience that is inconsistent with your official position here. I'm hoping you can help me understand how that discrepancy came to exist." Iris accepted the coffee and took a sip, buying herself a few more seconds to formulate her response. "My name is Iris Blackwood. That part of my identification is accurate. As for the operational experience indicated on that badge, yes, I had a previous assignment that involved specialized duties." Specialized duties. The colonel sat down across from her, his tone suggesting that he found her euphemism inadequate. "Sergeant Blackwood, the classification level on your badge, combined with certain other indicators, suggests that your specialized duties might have involved activities that fall under very specific operational categories." Iris realized that continuing to speak in generalities would only prolong an uncomfortable situation. Colonel Reynolds clearly understood enough about military classifications to recognize what he had seen. Sir, I was previously assigned to a unit that conducted long-range reconnaissance and precision elimination operations. My role involved neutralizing high-value targets in support of broader strategic objectives. The clinical language made her former life sound like a technical manual, but it conveyed the essential information without unnecessary emotional content. The colonel leaned back in his chair, studying her with renewed interest. Long-range precision elimination. That's a very specific skill set. And judging from certain numbers on your badge, you were exceptionally effective at it. Iris nodded slowly. I was competent at my assigned duties. Competent? Colonel Reynolds smiled grimly. Sergeant Blackwood, if the numbers I glimpse are accurate, competent is a significant understatement. That level of operational success represents years of high-risk deployments and suggests capabilities that are extremely rare, even within special operations communities. Before Iris could respond, the colonel's secure phone rang. He glanced at the caller identification and frowned. I need to take this call. As he spoke in urgent, clipped tones, Iris caught fragments that made her pulse quicken. Hostage situation. Mountain facility need precision capabilities. When he hung up, Colonel Reynolds looked at her with an expression that had completely changed. Sergeant Blackwood, I just received word of a crisis situation that requires exactly the kind of specialized skills your badge suggests you possess. He activated a secure terminal and showed her satellite imagery of a remote training facility. Armed hostiles have taken control of our mountain training center. 12 instructors and 30 trainees are being held captive. The facility's position makes conventional assault extremely difficult. Iris studied the imagery, her tactical mind automatically calculating angles, distances, and sight lines. What kind of response is being organized? That's where it gets complicated. The facility's defensive position would make a direct assault extremely costly in terms of casualties. We need someone who can neutralize key threats from long range, create opportunities for conventional forces to move in safely. Colonel Reynolds looked at her directly. Sergeant Blackwood, your operational record suggests you have experience with exactly this type of tactical problem. Iris felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders. For 3 years, she had successfully avoided exactly this type of situation, the moment when her specialized skills became relevant to immediate tactical problems. Sir, I need you to understand that returning to operational duties, even temporarily, represents a significant decision for me. There were reasons why I requested non-operational assignment, and those reasons haven't changed. I understand, and I wouldn't ask if there were other options available. But Sergeant Blackwood, we're looking at a situation where specialized capabilities could mean the difference between a successful resolution and a tragic outcome. Iris walked to a window and looked out toward the distant mountains where the crisis was unfolding. She could visualize the terrain from memory, having studied maps of the entire region during her transition to Camp Riverside. What kind of support would be available? Full divisional resources, intelligence, logistics, transportation, equipment, communications, anything you need to plan and execute the mission. Iris realized that her decision was being driven by factors beyond her personal preferences. If Colonel Reynolds' assessment was accurate, innocent people were in immediate danger, and her capabilities might represent the difference between life and death for multiple individuals. All right, she said quietly. Tell me what you know about the situation. 2,300 hours, powerful 86 hours later, Iris Blackwood stood on a ridge overlooking the mountain training facility, her rifle steady despite the wind. Through her scope, she could see the hostile positions that had seemed impregnable to conventional forces. But the Shadowhawk, the operative who had never officially existed, they were simply targets at manageable range. The first shot eliminated the hostile commander from 800 meters. The second took out their communications specialist. Within 20 minutes, Iris had systematically dismantled their defensive structure, creating the tactical opportunity that conventional forces needed to rescue all hostages safely. As she packed her equipment, Colonel Reynolds' voice crackled through her earpiece. Outstanding work, Shadowhawk. Welcome back. Iris Blackwood, the quiet range clerk who had hidden her lethal skills for 3 years, was gone forever. But sometimes the truth doesn't stay buried. Sometimes it emerges exactly when the world needs it most. The woman who had tried to disappear into administrative anonymity had been forced to confront a fundamental reality. Exceptional capabilities carry responsibilities that can't be easily discarded, no matter how much we might want to leave the past behind. Sometimes we don't choose our moments of truth. Sometimes they choose us.